Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric here with the Iraq Veteran 8888. Today we have a special presentation for you. This is not something that we typically do, but we thought it would be fun to do a little history lesson. And we're going to be discussing a family of rifles that I believe are relatively underappreciated. Not to mention, a lot of folks just don't really know about these guns. So I wanted to kind of spread some awareness and just show people that these cool old milsurps are out there. But there's some really cool history, and the guns that we have on this table represent a really cool transitional period in military weaponry, getting from around the 1870s on up into World War I and even exceeding World War I. But really, because of popularity of games such as Battlefield 1 and everything, where, it's set in a World War I environment, right? Lots of the guns that are on this table are used in the Battlefield game, of course, and, a lot of younger folks are getting interested in not only military history, but the actual guns that are used in these video games in real life have a really cool story. So we thought, for those of you that really care to go down this rabbit hole with me today, we're going to discuss the history of these World War I era guns and what makes them so cool. Now, the transitional period going from black powder to smokeless powder is a really cool and rich history because there was this giant arms race that occurred around the turn of the century, right? Militaries were going away from a front stuffer muzzle loader, and they were getting into not only cartridge-contained black powder, but also into repeaters. So there was this quick sort of renaissance of technology that was developing. And all of these countries wanted to get in on a piece of the cake, right? They all wanted their own, smokeless powder repeater. They all wanted their own black powder repeater. So from about 1860, getting out of the American Civil War and getting into the turn of the century and into World War I was just a really, really interesting development for small arms, okay? And I guess the real way that we want to discuss this, okay, is when you get out of a cartridge-contained black powder single-shot rifle. Let's start with that, okay? So lots of militaries were issuing a single-shot black powder cartridge-contained rifle. Okay, so no longer did you have to take a round and stuff it down the barrel with loose powder and put a cap on it and all of this stuff. This gun overnight, or in guns like this, really did make, a lot of black powder front stuffing firearms obsolete overnight. All right, this is an M80 Gros, okay, and it's chambered in 11 by 56. I hope I'm right there. Okay, so you can see it's a slow-moving, large neck down black powder round used as a cast lead bullet, but it is a single shot. Okay, so the soldier still had to load the gun one shot at a time. Okay, and that's pretty common, right? Once we got into this repeater era of a single shot cartridge contained rifle, let's look at something like the Martini Henry, for instance. One shot, you load it, you shoot it, you eject it, you continue shooting. So getting into that era of guns, that was a real common practice, right? For soldiers to stand en masse, in rank, shoot, reload, very similar to the old school techniques of a front stuffer, but simply just a little quicker to load. Not to mention the ammunition didn't suffer from nearly the type of field handling that a paper cartridge would. So getting into a brass case, okay, you get some better longevity for the ammo. The gun's a little easier to deal with, a little easier to clean, a little bit easier to load and shoot, and of course, faster to load. All right, cool. We're getting in the right direction. But as technology progressed, okay, what would happen with a lot of these guns is countries wanted a flatter shooting cartridge. They wanted a repeater that not only you could, load with a metallic cartridge, but that you could load several shots, right? So a gentleman by the name of Johann Friedrich Veterlli, okay, invented the most advanced service rifle in the world at the time, starting in the 1860s, late 1860s, and that's the Veterlli, all right? That's what we know as the Swiss Veterlli, okay? These were produced in Switzerland in the Bern factory, okay? And they were invented by Johann. And at the time, this was the most advanced military rifle in the world, okay? Now leave it to the Swiss to come up with a genius idea. All right, so get away from this big, heavy, slow-moving guy right here, this behemoth of a round with a really flat, not a super flat trajectory, right? It's a very anemic trajectory, but good power, okay? But anemic trajectory, which means that the soldier had to set very extreme settings on the rifle in order to have a flat line of sight to engage troops in the field. What, what Johann did with the Veterli was make a rifle that held about, I want to say 13 or 14 shots. Okay, so this is a tubular fed gun. So this is the first time you see the technology that, like, you know, the early Henrys and Winchester was using, right? Let's talk about that Yankee rifle that you load on Sunday and shoot all week, right? The Henry was a really, really interesting gun, right? Because it used its tubular magazine. So what Johann did was he took the tubular pattern, you know, from here down, from the action down, it almost looks like a Winchester or a Henry, right? You got that gate, you load your rounds in the tubular magazine. Now this entire understock here has a tubular magazine. Okay, so at that time that this rifle was developed, it was an extremely forward-thinking thing. And so not only did these soldiers have a rifle that held quite a few shots, but they went to a smaller diameter of the bullet, and they went to a much flatter trajectory. So setting for setting, while the trajectory was still relatively elliptical compared to, you know, a small bore round like we're about to get to, it provided a lot of firepower, low recoil, and generally flatter trajectory. So that was a pretty forward-thinking thing at the time. You got to think, this is like 1869, guys. This is not too long after the American Civil War, where we were still using front stuffers, right? We were way behind the curve when it came to worldwide firearms technology. In the United States, we had a frontier army, right? It's a completely different mentality, you would say, in the United States versus the Europeans, who were trying to cut each other to ribbons. It seemed like every other year somebody was in a war somewhere. So in Europe, it was much more important for them to develop repeaters and keep up with each other's technologies. So let's keep that in mind while we're talking about this. This is 1869 technology. Pretty forward-thinking stuff. Again, the Mauser broom-handled pistol would not come out for years later. Okay, so as a repeater and as a mass-produced infantry weapon, yeah, the Veterli is a pretty big deal, right? So what makes a Veterli is this really interesting action, right? So you combine like almost a quasi-Winchester style lifter with the Veterli action. So let's keep that in our minds here. Well, the Italians were like, hey, we like that idea, all right? And they wanted to develop their own version of it. So the Italians did the same thing. Shortly after the Swiss developed it, they said, man, that's a great idea. We're going to do that, okay? So the Italians and had their own Veterli bolt system. Now, this action is much different and much more simplified than the Swiss version, of course. They over-engineer everything, but great gun. Okay, so at first, the Italians fielded this rifle in a single shot, okay? And then later on, a captain by the name of Giuseppe Vitali, he worked up a 4-shot box magazine, and this is what we call a Vitali magazine conversion, okay? And it made it into a 4-shot repeater. Now, still paling in comparison to the capacity of the Swiss Veterli, you know, the Italian Veterli served pretty well in a transitional component. It's important to think of this as a transitional component because, you know, some of these guns found their way into World War I by the time that conflict came around, but we're going to get to that because there's another Italian rifle on this table that you're going to see goes into some different areas. You can see on the single shot version, it was just a standard wooden stock similar to the M80 Gross, which is why I have that rifle on the table here. You can see they added a metal reinforcement on here and of course the 4-shot box. And the Italian Veterli used a much more powerful cartridge than the standard 41 Swiss rimfire. All right, the Swiss rifle did utilize a rimfire round. Now this one has been converted to center fire function, okay? So we can actually shoot our Veterli, which is cool. I actually have 2 of these, and I think this is the unconverted rifle. That's cool. All right, so the Italians had this idea, and it was cool. You know, they kind of borrowed technology from Switzerland to come up with the idea of having their own Veterli. So that's where the Veterli Connection's at. We're not done with the Veterli Connection. So this is kind of an odd thing. we're getting into the Veterlli Connection in terms of the rifle action. Now we get into some crossover to the Dutch and with the Vitali magazine. So that's why these rifles are connected. The Dutch had their 11mm Beaumont, which again, similar to the M80 Gros, it's just a slow, heavy, chunkin', hunka-chunka cast bullet being pushed by black powder moving downrange. And just like the French, they had a single-shot version of their Beaumont service rifle chambered in this cartridge you see here. And they decided to convert their single shots over to repeaters because they were trying to keep up with the Veterlli, right? The Veterlli was setting the standard for a repeater, so they had to try to keep up. So then converting their Dutch rifles, their Beaumont rifles, into Vitali magazines, okay? And they used and borrowed the Vitali magazine conversion from the Italians, okay? So the Italians designed it, and then the Dutch borrowed it. So see that this is all World War I transitional, like, you know, right before, you know, the next major war, that transitional black powder thing where you're not into smokeless powder yet, but you're getting away from just a single shot front stuffer or a single shot rifle and into a repeating black powder rifle, which was, you know, kind of on the edge of technology, right? You have to think. Let's see, let's look at the date here. 1874, all right? Out of Maastricht. I can't say that word. Okay, it's a Dutch factory or town or whatever. Here we have 1876 and 1874. Let's think about the dates of the Civil War, right? We were issuing single-shot black powder front stuffers. Okay, think about that. That just that short amount of time later, not only did they have repeaters that use a brass case, but then also had multiple shot capability. Okay, and think about what other famous rifle was fielded around this time. The Martini-Henry was never suited to be an exceptional repeater. It was always a single-shot system. So if the Dutch would have went up against the British, the Dutch would have had a 4-shot repeater to go up toe-to-toe against the Martini-Henry. That's to say, you know, they have 4 times the ammunition on cap that the British would have in the Martini-Henry. Okay, so again, an arms race to have the biggest, baddest, you know, most repeating, most, you know, capable rifle. Okay, so that is the Vitali magazine connection with these 3 guns. Now let's get back to the Veterlli connection and let's get into World War I. Okay, so World War I comes around, and of course, by this time, the Italians have already developed a smokeless round. They've already developed rifles that use a smokeless round, but they could not issue nearly enough guns to all of the troops that they had in the war. So what did they do? Well, we've already got Veterlis laying around from, you know, before the war that, of course, now are obsolete because with this new smokeless round, it has a much flatter trajectory, better range, and, you know, quite frankly, it's just 2 different schools of thought, right? This smokeless round has way, way, way more range and power at range than this slow-moving guy here. So, you know, smokeless powder put all of these black powder transitionals completely into the obsolete category. So, Italy had a bunch of these old 10.4 caliber Veterlis laying around. So what did they do? They converted those into Mannlichers and sleeved the barrels to 6.5 Carcano. Now, this is a rear D style gun. This is not a frontline infantry gun. Okay, this was not intended for frontline use. And a lot of these sleeves, you have to be careful if you run into one of these. I would be very, very, very cautious of shooting these. Do not shoot them. The barrels are soft soldered in. Now it uses a sleeve to sleeve the barrel to 6.5 Carcano. And this was meant to be sort of a last ditch, rear D, guard duty, guarding palaces, stuff like that. Not like a super frontline gun, but what did they do here? It retained the Veterlli bolt system, okay? And they added their Carcano Mannlicher magazine, which we're going to get into a couple of examples of Mannlicher. And I also have something special we're going to unbox that this will be cool in a minute. All right, so now you have your 5 or 6 shot, you know, stripper clip that's a Mannlicher that can now work with this action. But when you look at the stock, you now see where they plug the stock, where the old Vitali magazine conversion used to be on the original 10.4s. So this is a 10.4 black powder that's been converted over to 6.5 Carcano for rear D, rear troop use. So that's kind of like the entire kind of story of the Veterlli, right? Now, there's other actions out there very similar, but these are probably the most predominant ones. And while there's a few examples of the Vitali magazine conversion out there around World War I and before that, the most predominant examples are right here on this table. All right, so, and here I've got a Carcano. Now this Carcano is like a troop special, you know, a nice little shortened one, and they did call it the troop special. This may not be a troop special, but it's very similar. This one was produced in 1929. Okay, so this is after World War I, but this is very similar to the, you know, now in World War I, they would have issued like a really long version of this. All of the rifles in World War I were these just long, ungainly, huge things with bayonets on them. But this is an example of taking that Mannlicher action, similar to what they used to convert over on this one. And this would have been a rifle that would have been in use in World War II and everything like that. Very similar, okay? But again, a Mannlicher style of action, which means that the clip stays integrated with the ammunition while the ammunition and clip are inside of the rifle. And I'm going to give you an example of that. Okay, so another World War I rifle, and this is getting a little bit out of the vein, but I wanted to mention it quickly in this video. Okay, this is a 8mm Lebel Berthier. Okay, and this is definitely a World War I era rifle. And you can see here that we have our charger with our 8mm Lebel ammunition. The way that a Mannlicher works, and this is getting kind of away from Vitali and Veterlli and getting into Mannlicher. I'm not going to load this, obviously, but we would take this, this stripper clip, okay, and the entire clip with the ammunition goes all the way down into the rifle, and it stays there until the last shot. After you fire the last shot, the clip itself, the metal charger, stays in the action. All right, so let's pretend it's in there. All right, I grab more ammo. I load it again. When I push down, this clip along with the ammunition is in the gun, and it pushes the old charger that is empty now out of this gate on the bottom. Okay, that's how that works. And then we have a repeater. Okay, we open the bolt, the charging piece is cocked, and it's basically a repeater. Okay, so pretty cool, pretty forward-thinking idea. And the reason that this is important to talk about in this video is because 8mm Lebel has the distinction of being one of the first smokeless powder rounds to be used in military service ever. Okay, the French developed smokeless powder in military use. They set forth an entire lightning rod of innovation in the small arms world. So smokeless powder changed the world overnight when it was developed. World War I was a scary war to be in. It was one of the first times that armies were slinging smokeless powder at each other. It was a scary thing, you know. In the old days, if somebody fired a black powder rifle, you could see a big old cloud of smoke, and you kind of knew where the other troops were at. You could hide, you could run away, you could engage them, you could do whatever you wanted. With smokeless, it changed warfare completely, and it was a scary situation. All right, so the last thing, and this kind of ties all this in a bit, but I will mention, all right, so I've got here an unopened box of M30 ammunition. This is 8x56 or 8x58, I can't remember. It might be 8x56 rimmed for the M95 Steyr Mannlicher, okay? And this is unopened, dating 1938. All right, this is original Nazi produced ammunition for the Steyr M95. We're gonna open it. Okay, this little sleeve here. Okay, and we've got the ammunition here for the Steyr M95. All right, so this is another example of a Mannlicher style action where this is a kind of a cool gun because not only do you have a straight pull action, right, in terms of how it operates, there's no turn bolt on this. Not only do you have a straight pull action, but then you combine it with the Mannlicher style of feeding. Okay, I'm not going to load this, but you would obviously just push it down all the way, and it operates very similar to the 8mm Lebel that I showed you. So that's taking that technology kind of full spectrum And the reason I wanted to show that rifle off is because this is the style of system that the Dutch used to replace the Beaumont and getting into the smokeless era. So all of these technologies sort of intertwine and intermingle, and you can see where the transitional period going from black powder to black powder repeater and then black powder repeater into smokeless, how that transition occurred. And this gives you a pretty solid example of all the technology that was, really in the forefront at the time. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was a little bit long, but maybe some of you who are into military surplus, maybe you're into collecting, you're into history, and maybe this gives you an idea of, some of your favorite guns that are out there. Sometimes we take for granted, right? You take an M1 Garand, or let's just go even further. You take an AR-15, you load your 30-round magazine in there, you slam the bolt release, you shoot until it's empty. The gun reloads itself. Pretty convenient, right? Sometimes we take these modern conveniences for granted. It's important for us to remember where our firearms technology came from, and it's important to kind of get a little bit of an idea, from an engineering perspective. There's some really cool forward-thinking engineering going on right here on this table. Not a single semi-automatic on the table. This is all manually operated, but it all does it in its own little unique way. And, there's just something to be appreciated about that. So, guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. We hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully I was right on my dates and stuff. Guys, sometimes it's hard to remember all this stuff. There's so much information out there that it's really cool to get into it. But thank you so much for watching. And all the folks who support us directly, like in terms of, supporting us on Patreon, if you purchase Man Cans, which is a subscription box that we sell each month, shirts over on the website on Ballistic Ink. If you love what we do and you see value in what we do and you'd like to support us financially, those are the most direct ways you can do so. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. I had fun making this video. Thank you so much. Many more videos on the way. We'll see you next time.